Conch piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each, along with what you should know before you get it done, getting the piercing done, what it's going to take to heal it, also living with the piercing, jewelry options, and what happens if you get tired of it and decide to take it out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 11. So if you want any of that, you might want to stick around. For those that are new to the channel, first off, welcome here. I hope you're enjoying it. But you may not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside the Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking about a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite piercings, the conch piercing. This is an ear piercing that is done through the chocha or chocha. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, of the ear, the bowl part of it. Basically, usually they define it anatomy-wise, those two bottom areas where there's right above where we do the date, right below where we do the date, right before you go into your ear canal, that bowl that sits on the outside, that's what we call a conch piercing. Now, it does have some roots in both India and Middle Africa with various different indigenous tribes. Nobody really knows exactly where this piercing came from. I do know that it was developed from a modern standpoint during the 1990s and was originally called Sadhu, I believe is how it's pronounced, Sadhu. And then slowly settled into the name Conch, which we say with a K. Conch. Before somebody comments and says, hey, I thought this is lately I've been noticing this, and I've had clients come in and ask for what's called an orbital. That isn't a thing. There's orbit piercings, which is a piercing that is two, usually ear piercings, that are connected by one piece of jewelry. Kind of like a industrial, but with circular jewelry. So it's more of an orbit, or it's orbital. Now, when you put a ring in a conch piercing, it does not change it from being a conch piercing. It just makes it a conch piercing with a ring, not an orbital. So we got that clear. With a little bit of background on this particular piercing out of the way, let's move on to the pros, the advantages, the things we like, the things that make people want to get this piercing, the things that are great about it. Starting with number 1, there's a lot of different placement options. Basically, anywhere on that bowl area of the ear, you can do this particular piercing. We usually do it, I like to do it so it matches other parts of the anatomy of the ear, but they're done kind of in a clock-like placement, meaning that they're done at like noon, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, etc. In fact, I've had clients that have had this done in a way to signify something in their life. For example, I had one client that had done to match the numbers of the clock. We did 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 6 o'clock, meaning that it was February 6, 2006, to signify the birth of her daughter. So you can do a lot of different things with this. You can do combinations. You can do multiples. We'll get a little bit into that later, but there's a lot of placement options. Number 2, this piercing, and it can be difficult, and I'll get to that later, does heal fairly quickly. You're looking at a 12 to 16-month period, or 16-week healing time. If you're lucky, maybe even as quickly as 2 months. It's really one of those piercings that it's kind of like an upper ear cartilage, but it doesn't tend to take quite as long. It also doesn't stay as tender as long, though it does have its issues with that too. But compared to other parts of the body, it's a pretty quick heal. Number 3, it's a very unique piercing. It is not a piercing you're going to see all the time. It's a piercing that's going to be a little bit more out there, a little bit more edgy, a little bit unique. than your standard ear piercings and etc. It's like I said, it's one of my favorite piercings to do. I like the look of it. I like the way that it fits into the body. It's just one of those piercings that aesthetically I think looks great, but it looks very unique. The angle can dictate that, the type of jewelry, etc. Number 4, you can do this so it fits well into the anatomy of the ear. I generally, like, one of my favorite placements is if you put your index finger on the top of your ear along that ridge that we call that's called the helix. Follow that down to where we put forward helixes, and then down to where that ridge that we pierce when we do DAFs, and straight into that. So it kind of fits into that natural curvature, like kind of the tail end or the period on that. You can also do it to fit, into other piercings that are flowing in the area. One other option is if you have, let's say, a faux rook at the top, you could do one below it to make it look even more like a rook without all the things that go along with having a rook. Number 5 can be done in groupings or combinations with other piercings. Of course, they're the most common combination, or one most people think of, is to do a conch to conch industrial. That's a very kind of extremely rare piercing. I haven't done one in a while. They look really cool because you just see that bar there. It just kind of seems like it's floating in the inside of your ear. You can also do multiple conch piercings. I've done them with studs, and then we've put rings in later, so it has that kind of waterfall effect of all these rings down the side of your face. All kinds of different combinations. It's all just up to what your anatomy looks like, what can fit in there, and your own imagination, or the added imagination of your piercer. Before we move on to the cons, let me ask you to do a couple things. If you haven't already, give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it. If you like it, because I like it when you like it. Also, if you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscription, click on that notification bell so you're notified every single time we post a video. So now it's time for the cons, the disadvantages, the things we don't particularly care for. Those things that may make you go, yeah, and ain't worth it. Starting with number 1, and this is a common one with all ear piercings, it is very difficult to isolate. It is located in an area of the body that we do have quite a bit of contact with. It is on the sides of your head. We wear clothing over it. We sleep on it. We do all kinds of other things. This piercing definitely needs to be isolated, especially during the healing process and sometimes even after it heals. It is definitely that is one of the reasons why this piercing has a reputation for being a little bit on the difficult side to heal, is because they get grumpy and all this other stuff. We'll get into that a little bit later. Number 2, as I said already, it can be a difficult piercing to heal sometimes. Because of the location and the fact that it has so much contact, the constant bumping and agitation can make it very difficult to heal this particular piercing. Also, there's not a lot of blood flow in the area, so that can also lead to a longer healing period and more difficulties. Number 3, during the healing process, you're pretty much limited to post-style jewelry. Back in the day, up until probably, I don't know, early 2000, right around in there, we used to always pierce these with rings. Very oversized rings for a couple of different reasons. First off, if you look at the area, if you could cut it in half and put it on a pegboard, I guess, with pins, like on some styrofoam, you'll notice that it's kind of like an off-centered T. And when you're putting jewelry in there that's circular, it needs to wrap all the way around that. That creates this huge profile that also leads to, number 1, problems isolating the piercing, plus the movement back and forth. Also, it needs to be a ring that doesn't have any pressure on the area, so thus a little bit big, not only to allow for swelling, but not to cause pressure and pulling and yanking on that tissue. The other problem with it is that we want it as flat as possible so that you have the shortest distance between 2 points and the fastest heal. So this is a piercing I really don't suggest getting done initially with a ring. It is best to heal it out with a post-style piece of jewelry. Then after it's well healed, and I'll get into this a little bit more when we get into jewelry, it might be okay to wear a ring in it. Number 4. Yeah, that's 4. This piercing is prone to periods of grumpiness and swelling. These can swell up pretty darn big if they're bumped around enough. They do not do well with trauma. Go back to number one, hard to isolate. It can go through phases where it just seems like it's perfectly fine, and then all of a sudden, boom, it flares up. It's swollen, it's ugly, it's angry, it's got a bump on it. These piercings do take a little bit of care and what we like to refer to as babying during the healing process. Babying is keeping anything and everything away from it, making your life healing piercing proof or trauma proof. Just like if you had a child or a puppy, there's certain things you want to avoid or put out of place to make sure that they don't get hurt. Same thing goes for a piercing. And this one, if you don't do that, it's going to be grumpy, and you're going to be seeing some swelling. Number 5, this must be angled correctly. If it's angled off this way, that way, what have you, it will cause hot spots and lead to bumps and scarring and all kinds of other problems. Thus, it is a fairly advanced piercing. It's not one of the more super advanced piercings, but it is definitely something that your average person doesn't know how to do, and I wouldn't suggest doing yourself, and I'd suggest seeking out somebody that has a little bit more experience doing these just to be on the safe side. Well, before we move on to things you should look for beforehand, let's talk a little bit about our merch store. We have various different t-shirts, various different other products, designs. We have fanny packs. We have phone cases. We have just about everything, and all that money goes to help keep this channel a-flowing. So, if you're interested in any of that, check out the link in the description. Also, there's one of those merch bars down below. So, what should you know before going in to get pierced? What are some things that you need to consider and think about? The first one is you want to find a piercer that's experienced, knowledgeable, informative, and has that passion to make you as educated about healing the piercing out and going through the process you possibly can. They should also make you feel comfortable. Now, they should evaluate they should give you a consultation beforehand that covers risks, healing time, what it's going to take to heal it, and any other question, answer any questions you have. During that consultation, they should also check your anatomy and make sure that the piercing is possible. Usually these last about a minute to 2. This is your time that if there's any questions you have to ask your piercer, and they should give you that opportunity. However, their consultation, if you sit down and listen to it, should cover most of the questions that you have about this piercing or any other piercing you get done. Now, I kind of already got to this before, but we're going to reinforce it. They should only suggest doing this with a post-style piece of jewelry, meaning either a barbell or a labrae stud. They should not suggest circular barbells, curved barbells, rings, or anything that's circular or has a curvature to it. This piercing does best, heals fastest, and has the least amount of problems when it is straight post jewelry. One of the things you want to ask during the consultation is, do they offer an aftercare product? Do they sell it? Do they give it away? Do they know where to purchase it? They should also, it's a good idea to ask if they give you written instructions and any type of verbal explanation on how to take care of the piercing. Now, COVID's going on, so me personally, I'm limiting the amount of time I spend with clients. I don't go through the big, long explanation. However, I do have videos on this channel and on my website that I refer people to, and I'm also available for any questions they have in the future. You need to know when you're picking out, especially if you're choosing a piercer for the first time, that they offer those things, because if they just hand you a card and tell you to clean it with Bactine, that just isn't enough. Not only is Bactine not what you want to clean a piercing with, but it's not enough information to make sure that you have an easy heal. It's going to make it more difficult. It's going to make you more prone to problems. Knowing in advance whether or not a piercer is going to give you that information is helpful to you. Now, if you wear sunglasses, glasses, goggles, anything that comes in contact with that area, it's a good idea to wear them when you come in to get pierced, especially if you're doing one that's on the higher part of the conch, kind of the upper part of the ear more vertically. You want to make sure that they're not going to have contact with that jewelry, especially during the healing process, but even afterwards you may have some issues with it. Now let's talk a little bit about the piercing experience. If you're planning on getting additional piercings, like you want to do a grouping of conches or you want to do additional piercings in that general area, I really suggest that you talk to your piercer about it, not only during the consultation, but remind them when they're starting to mark the piercing. Of course, it's easy to shift things and move things at that point, but it's hard to do that after the piercing is done and after the piercing is healed. To come back in and go, oh, yeah, I want to get this other piece here, and them going, I don't think there's room. So it's better to talk about it beforehand. Now, usually the standard procedure with these is to, of course, you fill out a waiver and all that stuff. You go through the consultation, you pick out the jewelry. Then they will set up, usually on a tray of some sort, all the materials and tools that they may need to do the piercing. Next, they're going to disinfect the area. Most piercers use some form of a surgical scrub. And that is to not only clean off dirt and debris in the area, but also to disinfect the area and reduce the amount of microorganisms that are on your skin, because you guys all have them. Yep, I'm sorry, you all have cooties. Next, they're going to mark it. Usually this is done a couple different methods, either using a surgical marker or the toothpick with the dye stuff. Either or is fine. When you're looking at the mark, and then they will show you the marking. Always be leery when there are piercings that I won't show the client, just basically because that's the only place they're going to get pierced. Things like navel piercings and nipple piercings and a lot of genital piercings. There really isn't a lot of options of moving it. This one, I usually suggest that you do any ear piercing, nose piercing, anything that's done on the face, that you do take a look at it before they do it. When you're viewing it, you want to look at it up close to get an idea of where it's at, and then at arm's length. When I mark conches, I usually mark not only the location on the inside in that chocha area to where it's going to be, but also a line to kind of let you know what the angle's at, and so that I can stay consistent with that angle. So that's generally how I mark it. Everybody has a little different idea on how to do it, but one way or another, usually sometimes because people can't really see it, I'll hold up a stick, a cotton tip applicator, hold up the back part of it to kind of tell you or give you an idea of where it's going to be positioned on the ear and at what angle. Now, the piercing itself is usually freehand, done with a needle receiving tube or cork or something on the backside, sometimes not. The jewelry insertion is usually, I'll pierce forward to back, so it may require, and I always use an insertion taper to do it, so it may require a little bit of additional time to actually get the jewelry in. Piercing, very quick, sharp. Pain consistency, probably a little less than maybe an upper ear cartilage piercing. Some people have complained that these piercings are a lot more painful, but if you begin to talk to them, they had them done at very large gauges, very thick jewelry, and that's the reason why it hurts so much. But it is a cartilage piercing. You're going to have that throbbing and aching almost immediately after. Usually lasts about 2 to 3 minutes. Then it's going to be tender to the touch, and we'll get into reactions later. There also might be some slight bleeding off and on for a few minutes after the piercing is done. We put a hole in you, so it's going to bleed. So don't be concerned. That's normal. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, throbbing, aching, warmness in the area will usually last a few minutes immediately after getting the piercing done. Now let's talk about healing. Average healing time, as I said earlier, I usually say 12 to 16 weeks. So roughly about 3 to 4 months. Some people longer. Everybody heals at different rates. I've had clients that will heal this piercing out in just about a little over 8 weeks. Other people that it's taken close to 6 months to a year. So go into it with the understanding that it might be a short, quick heal, or it might be a long one. And the better you treat the piercing, the more you isolate it, the better and faster it's going to heal. What I'm going to suggest as far as aftercare is saline. Cleaning with sterile saline spray twice daily. I like Nelmed wound wash or piercing aftercare. Also, practicing cross-contamination prevention. That means wash your hands before you handle it. No oral contact. No exchange of bodily fluids. Keeping your environment clean. Clothing, bedding, towels. Not submerging the piercing in bodies of water you can't control the quality of, as in no swimming. Keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you. Additionally, because we're still in the pandemic, you want to avoid wearing, you can't really avoid wearing the mask. So if you're wearing the mask, make sure you're changing them on a regular basis. If you can find the kind that have a single loop in the back and that have nothing to do with the ear, that might be your best option. Otherwise, be very cautious when you're taking them on and off. There is going to be jewelry back there that is going to be easy to get hooked on those strings, so don't just pull it off. The other thing is you may want to consider getting those clips that sit in the back of the head that kind of pull the string away from it. Make sure there's no pressure or added stress on the piercing during the healing process. Also, keep unclean objects away from the piercing. Things like telephones, headphones, earbuds. Whether or not you'll be able to wear earbuds after the piercing is done is kind of a flip of the coin, and it has a lot to do with the positioning. I should have mentioned this earlier, but it is definitely something you want to talk to your piercer about as they're marking. If you do wear headbuds a lot or earbuds or what have you, it's a good headbuds. What the hell's a headbud? Anyway, if you do wear those a lot, you may want to consider bringing them with you and see how much contact there's going to be with that piercing when they mark it. Yeah, last thing is make sure your hair is clean before it comes in contact with the piercing. Avoid tucking your hair behind your ears. It's going to get caught all the time, and it's going to be a complete pain. Now, during the healing process, I've said this quite a few times, but we'll say it one more time, avoid contact with the area. That means no sleeping on it. If you do have to sleep on that side, you need to figure out some way to elevate it off the bed, such as we're using a U-shaped travel pillow or concocting something that keeps it off the bed. Any pressure, no matter how good it feels, how it doesn't hurt, what have you, is probably going to lead to issues. Even if it isn't putting a lot of pressure on it and a lot of trauma, it's making the jewelry probably move, and that could cause just as much issues as, beating yourself upside the head with a tennis racket. Why'd you do that? I don't know. Normal reactions is going to see, for the first 3 to 5 days, you're going to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, inflammation, swelling, also maybe some slight bleeding off and on. Now, if that occurs after the fact, you should contact your piercer because something isn't right. Now let's move on to jewelry. What some options and etc. The first thing is you want to wait until the piercing is completely healed. If the jewelry is loose or doesn't fit tightly, it's a good idea to exchange it for a shorter post. Having a long piece in there is just going to increase the likelihood of this piercing getting knocked around and suddenly becoming grumpy or having other issues. The jewelry should always fit comfortably, but not too tight. You don't want something that's digging into that tissue. It should be kind of loose-fitting. I often describe it as it's kind of like jeans. You want them tight enough that they fit right, but you don't want them so tight that you can't breathe. They need to be kind of in that middle. Usually about 1 millimeter to eighth of an inch, maybe less, 1/16 of an inch. Too wide is your best option. Even after the piercing is healed, I would suggest avoiding edges that have sharp or ends that have sharp edges, points, things that are dangling off of it, or anything that may get caught on stuff. Now, rings. Rings are possible in this piercing. There's just a couple of things that you need to consider before putting in a ring and to look for. First thing is, the ring, you want to make sure the piercing is well healed in season. Now, well healed means it's no longer an open wound. Seasoned means that it's toughened up and strengthened. So if it takes, let's say it takes 3 months to heal, I would suggest waiting an additional 6 months to a year before you change that jewelry, meaning from the date you got it pierced, at least 9 months to roughly about 15 months. And the reason being is that you are going to be taking something that is straight, the piercing, and then you're suddenly going to be putting something in there that's curved, and that pressure can cause a healed piercing to suddenly flare up, get bumps, get sore, get tender, and have all kinds of other problems. The other thing is the rings are usually a little heavier. They have more contact with things because they're a higher profile. So it's going to get yanked around a little bit more than it would if you just stuck with the post-style jewelry. The other thing is it has to be wide enough to wrap all the way around the ear. Your ear is, that area is kind of shaped like this. Kind of like an off-center T. That jewelry needs to go all the way around everything and then through the piercing. So you're going to end up with a slightly wider piece. You may want to consider if that your end goal is rings, always mention it to your piercer at the time of piercing. They could possibly adjust it further out. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. It really depends on your anatomy. But you are going to need something that wraps comfortably around that ear and is not pinching or having pressure or creating hot spots. So it needs to be a little bit bigger. That's just the way life is. It's what fits. Now let's talk about living with the piercing. Jewelry should be left in at all times. Removing jewelry and leaving it out for an extended period of time, any piercing, no matter how long you've had it, you're always risking the possibility of it closing, the possibility of causing damage when you put the jewelry back in, or causing an infection. So it's best to leave the jewelry in or leave something in the piercing at all times. Now, avoid pressure or trauma, etc., on the piercing even after it heals. A lot of people have this misconception. They constantly are like, oh, it's not healed yet. And you go, why do you think it's not healed? And they'll go, well, when I pull on it, it hurts. It hurts not because it isn't healed. It hurts because you're applying trauma to that piercing. You're taking a sharp object that's in soft flesh and pulling and yanking on it. Of course, it's going to hurt. And, of course, it's going to flare up. So always avoid trauma, snagging, etc., even in a healed piercing. It's best to kind of baby them and keep things kind of isolated. You generally learn this during the healing process, and even after it heals, once you have that habit, it doesn't seem like that much of a pain. But don't think because you suddenly healed this piercing that you're going to be able to roll over and sleep on it. Which brings us to the next thing. It may never feel comfortable to sleep on it. Also, headphones may never feel comfortable, especially if you wear a ring, because that ring's going to have a higher profile and it's going to cause more contact. If you wear glasses or sunglasses or goggles or anything that goes over your ear, it's a good idea to test them before purchasing to make sure that they do not have contact with the jewelry. One last thing that I forgot to put in the notes is earbuds, headphones, stethoscopes, etc. Usually, it's something you want to talk about at the time of piercing, as I mentioned earlier, but usually the conch doesn't have as much contact as long as it's not done in this lower region. However, there are some people out there that it just gets bumped around. It doesn't do well with them, especially with the more modern digital-style stethoscopes that have a larger earpiece. So you really want to think about that stuff before getting it done if you work in a profession that requires you to wear them. One final thing, and then we'll move on to abandoning the piercing. Hair. If you have long hair and you have a habit of sweeping it behind your ear and etc., if you have jewelry that has sharp edges or points, it's going to get tangled and caught in it. Even after it heals, when you go see the beauty person, your salon or beautician, that was the word I was looking for earlier, or barber, make them aware that you have piercings on your ears and to stay away from them. I swear to God, those combs are designed to destroy piercings. Now let's talk about abandoning the piercing. Let's say you've gotten into a situation where you just don't want it anymore, or for work or whatever, you have to take it out. What's going to happen? If the piercing's healed, there's really nothing you need to do. It's not an open wound. You don't have to worry about infection. You don't have to worry about any problems. If it's during the healing process, you want to treat it like a healing wound, just like a puncture or cut or anything else, abrasion that's on your body. You want to keep an eye on it. You want to keep the area clean and give it time. You want to monitor it, and if there's any signs of infection or other problem, contact your medical professional. Otherwise, even if it's healed, they will slowly close. You will probably see a scar there. Usually it's circular in shape and about the same thickness or width as the jewelry was. Over time, that may fade. Usually these don't scar a great deal, just more of kind of an indentation. Sometimes any healed piercing or healed over piercing or abandoned piercing will produce what is called sebum. It's a cottage cheese looking substance, has a very distinct odor to it. Basically what it is the oil that your body uses to keep you moisturized and waterproof. And for some reason, it does tend to collect in piercings. There's a lot of theories that it produces more of this when it comes to scar tissue, and thus they're more prone in piercings. But it will collect sometimes in these healing piercing or overhealing or closing. The thing with piercings when they close, they seal first in the center, and then slowly your body starts to fill up that tissue or that hole outward. So sometimes there's a little bit of that tunnel left in there. Your body produces the sebum and a few dry, dead skin cells and a bunch of other stuff, and it'll start collecting in there. So then when you squeeze the area, this white stuff comes out. Don't be concerned about it. It's completely normal. It's completely healthy. It shouldn't be an issue. It's not infected. You don't have to worry about it. If anything else occurs that doesn't look right, like it comes out yellow or pussy or mucousy, or it throbs and aches and there's streaks coming off of it, yes, you need to see a doctor. So that's it. I hope you found this informative and enjoyable. Thank you for watching. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care, stay warm, and we will see you in the next video.